From the studios of KENW on the campus of Eastern New Mexico University, it's You Should Know, featuring the people and events of Eastern New Mexico and West Texas.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Evelyn Ledbetter, and I'm your host for You Should Know. I have Doc Elder, or Donald Elder, with me today as my guest. Welcome.
Evelyn, what a pleasure to be here. Of course, I've followed your career with great interest, and congratulations on being the host of the show.
Well, I have learned a great deal. I sat in on, you're a mentor of mine, so I've watched you the last year of what you do, and thank you for that.
Well, you'll far surpass me, young lady.
I don't think so, but you're always gracious and kind, and that's one of your great characteristics. So you've been at Eastern, your life is just amazing. So kind of want to go back and dig into your early life. There's so much. This is Doc Elder behind the mic. Is it odd to be interviewed versus to be the one doing the interviewing?
I actually had the experience of being on Sportslook within the first couple of years that I was at Eastern, long before I became the host of Sportslook. Dallin Sanders was still the host, and Phil Claybaugh and I used to broadcast football, and so he brought the two of us in and interviewed. So not the first time that I've been interviewed on KNW, but it is kind of a surreal experience not to be the one asking
the questions and not knowing what's going to come.
Exactly.
You're a Midwestern boy.
I sure am. I was born in a small town. Well, at the time it was a small town. It was called Farmington, Minnesota, and it literally was a farming town south of the Twin Cities. But Twin Cities has grown so much in the last 70 years that it's just a suburb of Minneapolis now. And outside of the fact that there's still a Dairy Queen like there was back in the day, I don't recognize that town at all.
The Texas stop sign was the Dairy Queen
exactly.
symbol. Minnesota, how big of a town? What was the population?
When I was there, it had a population. The 1950 census was 1,500. And the 2020 census, it's now 22,000.
Quite a growth. But like you said, it's just merged into the bigger cities. You don't even notice the difference. And your home life? Tell me about your family and growing up.
Interestingly enough, Evelyn, you would have thought, looking at my family, that I would grow up to be a broadcaster, because my father was a broadcaster. He had actually gotten hired by NBC when he was 20 years old and had been sent to their station in Fargo, North Dakota, and was a radio broadcaster in the 30s, going into the 40s. And then in 1941, they moved him all the way up from Fargo, North Dakota to Chicago, which at the time was the flagship station of NBC Radio. And so my dad worked with people, and for most of our viewing audience, the names aren't going to mean much, but Hugh Downs and John Chancellor and Dave Carraway, they were groomsmen for my dad when he got married. So, I mean, the big names in NBC.
Heavy hitters.
Yeah, exactly. And then with the transition from radio to television, you know, unfortunately, we're a visual medium, and there are some people who were very acceptable as radio broadcasters, but they're not as photogenic as you. And so.
Or you.
You're too good. That's why I love working with you. So my dad was a good looking guy, and so he actually made the transition over to television. But it's a high pressure industry, and finally, my dad just it wasn't worth the strain and the long hours. And so he quit and took a job with a company that an uncle of mine had started in Farmington, Minnesota. And so I missed his broadcast career by a year. He's quit NBC in 51, and I was born in 52. But lo and behold, here I am broadcasting just like my dad did, and I'm not as good as my dad.
Oh, no, I doubt that very much. I think we're much more critical on ourselves, but the DNA obviously was there. Did he have the same voice as you? Very similar?
People tell me that if they were listening to a recording of my dad and were listening to me, that indistinguishable.
Just interchangeable.
Yep.
That's a nice thought, like a piece of your dad's inside of you. So when your dad, was he married when he was in Chicago?
My dad married my mom in 1943, tried to have children. My mother had a number of miscarriages. I was the first child that actually went full term. And so
Mm.
I was the darling of my mother's
Oh,
eye, just her
yeah.
sweet princess. And so I was spoiled.
Well, your mama doted on you just a
She
little
did
bit.
just a little bit.
And siblings?
I have a younger sister who's 4 years younger than I am and still actually lives in the town that I grew up in, because we moved when I was 5 years old to Marshalltown, Iowa. And so most of her life was in She was one when we
Okay.
moved to Marshalltown. She has no memories of
Sure.
Farmington. I have a lot of memories, surprisingly, of Farmington, and all of them involve snow, which is why I think I ended up here in the Southwest, because I think I froze when I was a kid, and
Oh.
I've been trying to thaw out ever
Ever
since.
since.
You're getting shivers just hearing me tell stories about how cold it is.
So your sisters, if you're 39 plus change, your sister's 35 right now.
Plus change, yes,
Right, right.
exactly.
Yeah, you definitely had the cold. I have a friend that moved to Illinois, and she said, you guys don't have a clue what
No,
cold weather is.
nope.
So your interest when growing up.
I hoped to be a pitcher for the Dodgers. Dodgers were my team, and you
Okay.
got to understand, Evelyn, I'm old enough that when I first started watching baseball, they were the Brooklyn Dodgers. They didn't move to LA until '58, and so Brooklyn Dodgers, Los Angeles Dodgers, always my team. And especially when the Dodgers had Sandy Koufax, who was a great left-handed pitcher, he was the guy I wanted to be. But when your fastball tops out in the low 70s, you're probably not going to get too many major league scouts looking at you. So it's like, okay, what's my fallback position?
I guess Charlie Pride started with, he was baseball, and it didn't develop, but he's a great singer. So you had a fallback.
And George Thorogood. A lot of people don't realize that the
Mhm.
great guitar player from the 80s, he was also an outstanding baseball player that just figured out he could make more money playing guitar and singing than he could pitch. Now, today, you'd stay with baseball because those contracts are insane.
They are. But well, for us here at KENW, I'm kind of glad your baseball career didn't turn out quite as well. So sorry, I'm very selfish, but it worked out really well for all of us here at Eastern and KENW. So
And Evelyn, I feel the same way. I mean, and you and I share a number of individuals. There are people working on your crew that have worked on my crew. And it's just great to see these young people and help to nurture them and develop them and know that they're going to go on and they're going to do great things with their
I
careers.
agree. The impact you can have on that is pretty tremendous. And, the 30 years of my prior life, this is truly working with the students is huge and having an impact, and they impact us. They give back as much as or more than we give, I think, sometimes.
I think the reason why we both look as young as we do is because we're hanging around young people who bring a lot of youthful energy, and that helps keep
It
us
helps.
young.
I always like when they come back to school and that energy just bounces back.
Yep.
So baseball, so you started playing to Little League and that sort of thing from the beginning?
Little League all the way up through high school, and I was realistic enough to know that I didn't quite have the fastball to be able to
Okay.
pitch on the college level. So I just then lived vicariously through coaching baseball. I was a high school social studies teacher and coach for 9 years after I got my bachelor's degree in 1974. And one of the sports I coached was baseball. And the name probably isn't going to mean much to you, but there was a great pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles back in the 80s named Mike Boddicker, who helped pitch the Orioles to a World Series championship. I coached against him. And I coached against
Wow.
a guy named Bruce Kim, who was the catcher for Mark Fidrich, who was a great pitcher for the Tigers back in the 80s. So I wasn't a good enough coach to develop a Mike Boddicker or Bruce Kim, but I
Oh,
got to coach against guys like
well,
that.
I kind of think you might have done okay. If you get the right talent and the right coach together, it can be so tremendous. And the interesting thing, and I've said this when I do tours here at the station, um, coaches can be such a positive impact and such a negative impact depending on
Either
the
or.
personality,
Yep.
either way. But yeah, so other sports, did you play other than baseball?
I was lucky enough. I went to a high school the size, and for our viewing audience, the size of like Clovis High School
Okay.
or Hobbs Carlsbad. And I was just good enough to be a four-sport athlete. My best sport was actually track, which was the one that I enjoyed the least, but I could run.
That was me.
And I was, as the distance got greater, my performance got better. And I just think a lot of people weren't willing to subject themselves to the pain. And it's like, okay, this is one thing I can do. I can absorb a lot of pain. And
I think I did not know that, because that was me, distance running. I played volleyball and basketball, but I excelled at track. And I didn't like to run. I never had the runner's high, but I loved to win.
yes,
Love that medal. And
Yep.
I would do, with a great coach, I would do anything. And they wanted me to play because it helped me in volleyball and basketball, and just by chance that wound up being the sport. What did you run?
so I ran back in those days, and to show you how old I am, we still had yards. And so I ran the 880 and the mile.
Okay,
and the
I did
2
too.
mile.
It depended on which meet. Sometimes they were meters and sometimes they were the yard.
See, nobody
1600,
in Iowa had
1600
meters.
meter,
Yeah.
the mile.
Nope, it was a lot of yards back when I ran.
Okay. That's cool.
And it's interesting you're talking about being competitive. I mean, I think if you ask anybody who knows me, they'll say that I'm a good sport if I lose. I'm a gracious winner when I win. But win or lose, they'll tell you I'm one of the most competitive people they've ever met.
Well,
And
you know, that's
I love winning.
there's probably very few of us that don't, truly. It's hard to be gracious sometimes. and
Yep.
Hard to not be a sore loser on
Yep.
occasion, but that's truly speaks highly of a person's character, I think, if you can shake their hand. And I love on football and different sports on TV if they, they're friends.
Yep.
Once the game's
Once the
over,
game's over.
they've played together, this or that, and came into contact.
And Evelyn, I can tell you that if we're ever up for a New Mexico Broadcasters Association award and you beat me, I'll be the first to shake your hand, and I will be genuine that I'm happy.
You're probably just going to have to shake my hand now, because I don't think it's ever going to happen. But I'll take the handshakes. So tell me about your parents. As far as your dad, was that something you shared with him? Or your mom? Did you go to games together and do those sorts of things?
My dad was a great athlete, and I'm not just using hyperbole. He graduated from high school in 1936, and his senior year, not just once, but on a number of occasions in basketball, he outscored the whole other team all by himself, and was good enough to play community college basketball, and actually went to the University of Iowa to play basketball. But that's when he was discovered by NBC, and he decided that a career in radio sounded much more appealing. And
Probably much more lucrative. At that time, playing in sports was nowhere near. Who would have ever dreamed what's paid nowadays?
No, absolutely.
So he gave that up. And your mom?
My mom was and she was an overachiever at a time when only 1 out of 10 high school graduates went to college back during the 1930s.
Oh,
She got a bachelor's and a master's, and back at that, women only were 10% of a very small group.
Sure.
So my mom was way of an overachiever in getting a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in the 1930s.
That's pretty amazing. Even when I attended Eastern in the 80s, there weren't a lot of females in the College of Business. We were definitely the minority, and
Yep.
you had to work twice as hard, I think, and sometimes to be taken as serious. But it's okay.
Oh, and your generation, and you're obviously much younger than I am, but your generation was the one that really made the transition from my mom, who was extremely well educated, highly competent, but just given American society at the time, she was a housewife.
You have to give her the kudos. I mean, that's breaking the glass ceiling for her. I mean, a bachelor's and a master's.
Yep.
That's pretty amazing.
But for women such as yourself, you've proven that women can succeed at the highest levels and should be given a chance.
But people like that are what that gave you the encouragement and the incentive to. They've done it. I can do it.
Yep, exactly.
So I'm going to delve into this a little bit. Your memory and your recall is absolutely amazing, and I've watched you. So I'm going to guess photographic memory.
Pretty much.
Tell me what all is engaged. I mean, obviously, when you were little, this was noticed pretty soon.
I remember once we were having a discussion, and somehow the subject came up about my great-grandfather, and to show you how old I am and how old people in my family are when they get around to having kids. My great-grandfather fought in the Union Army in the Civil War. And so at the table one day, we're sitting around with my grandmother, my grandfather, my mom, and my dad, and I talked about his service, and grandmother elder was talking about, and his commanding officer was, and she kind of went blank for a minute. And I'm 5 years old, and I said, William Tecumseh Sherman. And everybody at the table just turned and looked at me like.
And a name that that's not easily pronounced.
Not easily pronounced. And
I can't even tell you what it is right now, and you just said it.
William Tecumseh Sherman. Yeah, so, I mean, at the age of 5 years old, it was like, okay, if we see something around this kid, he's probably going to remember it. So we got to be very careful.
We've got to be very careful. He's going to remember everything. So did they have you tested or just into gifted programs, I would think?
Back in those days,
it didn't exist.
There were not gifted and talented programs, special ed. I got a teaching certificate, never had a course in special ed. Never had a class in what to do if you've got a really smart kid in your class. What do you do? One that has learning disability or something of that nature. So basically, I just was sitting in a normal classroom. But I think that was good for me because it really forced me. I had to be able to relate to students from all different backgrounds and all different educational levels. And sports really helped me out a lot because, sometimes kids who perform well in the classroom kind of get picked on
a lot because you're too smart and you're nerdy and brainy but the athletics leveled that out because that's cool.
Yep.
So you could blend into both worlds.
Indeed.
My best friend in high school, he dumbed it down. He was much brighter than I was, but I was so determined to make as good of grades or better. Got later into high school, he started making not as good of grades, but I think he did it on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because he wasn't fitting in as well. But once he wasn't top, but by far, much brighter than I was, but a hard transition.
Yeah. But hopefully that's something that as American society progresses, will put more of a value on educational achievement. And so girls, guys, whatever, nobody will have to feel like I have to dumb it down to blend in, that we can just respect.
We have different talents in different areas.
Yep.
So, of course, history. I'm going to guess that was just in you from the beginning, that you loved it.
Well, if we're sitting around the table and we're discussing the Civil War when I'm 5 years old, you kind of get the idea that I was raised in a family that valued the past. And so history was always my love, history and sports. So if you keep me on history, sports, or music, I really sound like I know what I'm talking about. You get me on something else, and I'm not going to sound like I'm all that smart.
Oh, when I watch you on Sports Look and your recall, and I had noticed this for years, and I thought, how does he memorize the names? Because when you do the sports casting for the university, you know the roster for the opposing team and can call it all through those games. And I thought, what a struggle when you don't have that gift.
I honestly don't know how sportscasters who don't have the ability to learn names quickly and to recall them, I don't know how they do it, because it's especially basketball, because the ball is always in motion. There's always a play taking place. And so you have to have those names right at the tip of your tongue.
So, Doc, I know you probably have been offered positions to do sports casting much more than on the local level. Am I right?
Evelyn, with all due modesty, I will say that I have had opportunities to go elsewhere, but I don't have many good character attributes, a lot of bad ones.
No.
But one good character attribute is that I am extremely loyal. Same thing holds true with Eastern. I mean, I could have gone elsewhere, but Eastern was nice enough to give me a job in 1995, and as long as they feel that I'm doing an adequate job, I'm going to stay at Eastern. As long as what is now Global One Media, the commercial company that I broadcast for, as long as they feel I do an adequate job, I'm never going to go broadcast for anybody else. And I love KENW.
Oh, well.
Isn't this great? We get to host our own TV
This is not
program.
phenomenal. Who would have ever thought, right?
A kid from Floyd, New Mexico, and a kid from Farmington, Minnesota, growing up and having our own TV programs. But no, I'm completely loyal, and as long as Alan and everybody here at KENW would like me to continue to do sports, like this is my home.
Well, we have a rule. You have to give a 25-year notice before you can quit. So just
Okay.
know, just know.
I appreciate it. Bring that to my attention.
Right, it has to be in writing. But was there something that tempted you?
Yes.
What would you have? What were you offered that was a huge temptation?
The jobs that were most intriguing that I was offered would have involved more broadcasts, but I get one day a week. I've got my slot on Thursday nights at 9 o'clock on Channel 382 and 9:30 on Channel 3one.
And don't miss out. You're missing out if you don't watch Doc's show, let me tell you.
Exactly. So there was a phrase once that went, enough is plenty. And so I get enough, and that's plenty. So I've never seriously thought about taking another offer. I'm just very privileged to broadcast and to teach, and I will continue to do it as long as my services are deemed worthy.
So this is a little personal. Do you even get paid for your broadcasting that you do for the university on the games?
I get a very nice paycheck from Global One Media to broadcast sports. The KNW people pay me very nicely.
Oh, you're being very generous. We are PBS.
The one thing I do for free, and I'm not sure if our listeners are aware of this, but in the Lone Star Conference, anytime you host a home contest, whether it's women's soccer or softball or baseball or basketball, you have to provide live audio and video to the Lone Star Conference that then sells the right to watch those contests. And Paul Weir, our athletic director, asked me if I would be willing, when I could, to do that. And so if it's not conflicting with teaching, which is obviously kind of important, the taxpayers pay me a really nice salary to show up and teach classes, or if I'm not broadcasting football. So this fall I'll be doing some Lone Star Conference volleyball, some Lone Star Conference men's soccer, some Lone Star Conference women's soccer, and I just do that for free,
just out of the passion and love of it.
Out of the passion and love that I have and the respect I have for the young men and women, and if I can help to bring them to a larger audience, I'm happy to do so.
Do you travel with the team?
I have been offered that opportunity, but I really like the flexibility of just being able to set my own schedule. And I love to drive, and I love to listen to music. And so I just sit there and jam as I'm going down the road. And if I ever reach the stage where it's like, oh gosh, I have to drive to San Angelo to broadcast, then I need to get out. But as long as this, oh boy, I get to drive to San Angelo, Texas.
I get a road trip. Yeah, because your furthest, our furthest game is what, Kingswood? Where is it, right? It's
Texas A&M Kingsville, and also now the University of Arkansas Fort Smith is in the conference. And so those are almost equidistant. They're long.
It's a road trip. You're like me.
Yep.
That's how I unwind and relax when things are good or bad. Pop in the car and go.
Yep.
So, so a little bit else. So you moved in Portales in 1995, and you've been here at the university ever since.
Yep. Starting my 29th year.
That's amazing. And a little bit on your family. You've got, we didn't even get to that as far as you were married for a lot of years.
I was
for a beautiful
married
woman.
when I was 22 years old, got married in 1974, and my lovely wife was my wife for 47 years before she sadly passed away in the spring of 2021. But We had two boys, and they are both married. And one, my older son Cam, who actually used to work he was a broadcast journalism major, and so he was the sports guy for News 3 New Mexico for many semesters. He and his wife are expecting their second child, and my younger son Brian, who is also an Eastern student, he and his wife are expecting their first child. So,
Well, congratulations.
so I joke with the boys, you had to wait until I got to be 70 years old to have a grandchild, but better late than never.
Better late than never. Awesome, awesome. Well, we're wrapping up on this segment. We barely touched on so much, and hope to have you come back in and continue on.
Evelyn, thanks so much, and I would love to be back on again.
The man behind the mic. And to all of you out there, thank you for watching. We will see you next time on You Should Know. Cheers.